They told her women didn't belong in the kill house. Then she became the shot they'd never forget. The conference room went silent the moment Lieutenant Jessica Morgan stood and said she was applying for Scout Sniper School. Not the polite kind. Of silence, the kind that presses against your chest like a hand. Around the long oak table, 12 Navy SEALs sat frozen, coffee cups halfway to lips, eyes wide with something between disbelief and barely concealed amusement. One of them, a broad-shouldered operator named Garrett, with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, leaned back in his chair so hard it creaked. He didn't even try to hide this smirk. You, he said, drawing the word out like taffy in SEAL training. Someone near the back snorted. The sound echoed. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing who's listening to this story. Jessica didn't flinch. She'd learned not to. 5 years in naval intelligence, 2 deployments, analyzing enemy positions from satellite feeds while men like Garrett kicked down doors and collected the glory. She knew what they saw when they looked at her. 5'6", 130 pounds, soaking wet. A woman whose hands had never gripped anything heavier than a tactical pen. They saw someone who analyzed war from air-conditioned rooms, not someone who could survive it in the dirt. But what they didn't see, what they couldn't possibly know, was the 300 hours she'd spent on civilian ranges in her off time. The way her pulse slowed to a crawl when her finger found the trigger. The eerie stillness that came over her when the world shrank to nothing but crosshairs and breath. Yes, she said, her voice steady as bedrock. Me? Garrett's smirk widened into a full grin. He glanced around the table, gathering his audience. Sweetheart, do you have any idea what Scout Sniper School is like? We're talking 8 weeks of hell, stalking through swamps, sleeping in mud, shooting targets at 1,000 yards in winds that'll knock you sideways. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes glinting with condescension that felt rehearsed. It's not Call of Duty. It's not a computer screen. It's real. The room rippled with low chuckles. Jessica felt heat crawl up her neck, but she kept her face neutral. She'd learned that too. Never let them see you break. Her commanding officer, Captain William Brooks, sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable behind wire-rimmed glasses. He'd been the one to encourage her application, the one who'd seen something in her pattern analysis work that others missed, an almost supernatural ability to predict movement, to see 3 steps ahead. But even he looked uncertain now, outnumbered by the skepticism filling the room like smoke. I understand what it is, Jessica said quietly. That's why I'm applying. Garrett shook his head, still grinning. Tell you what, you make it through Hell Week, which you won't, I'll personally carry your gear for a month. The table erupted in laughter. Someone slapped the wood hard enough to rattle the water pitcher. She thought she'd never have to see him eat those words. She was wrong. 8 weeks later, the California desert stretched endlessly in every direction, shimmering with heat that turned the horizon into liquid glass. Jessica lay motionless in a shallow depression she'd carved into the sand 3. Hours before dawn, her ghillie suit making her indistinguishable from the scrub brush surrounding her. 200 yards ahead, an instructor named Sergeant Callahan moved slowly through the training field, searching. He'd already walked past her position twice, his boots coming within 6 feet of her head. She didn't breathe, didn't twitch. The sun hammered down with brutal intensity, turning the inside of her suit into an oven. Sweat pooled in the small of her back, trickled down her temples, stung her eyes. Her muscles screamed from holding the same position for so long. But she'd learned something in those 8 weeks of hell that Garrett and his friends never anticipated. Pain was just information. You could acknowledge it and keep moving. The course had nearly destroyed her. Week 1, she'd vomited twice during the ruck marche, her shoulders raw and bleeding from the 70-pound pack. Week 3, hypothermia during the underwater navigation exercise left her shaking so violently they almost pulled her from the program. Week 5, she'd failed her first long-range shot so badly the instructors wondered aloud if she belonged there. But she'd adjusted, adapted, learned that her smaller frame meant less weight to drag through obstacles, that her patience, honed through years of analysis work, made her a ghost during stalking exercises. She'd learned that being underestimated was a weapon all its own. Growing up in rural Montana had taught her things these city-bred operators never learned. Her father, a former Army Ranger turned hunting guide, had taken her into the wilderness every autumn since she was 8 years old. He taught her to read wind patterns in the way aspens trembled, to move through forests so quietly deer wouldn't startle, to wait with the kind of patience that only comes from watching elk for hours through a scope. The best hunters aren't. The strongest, Jess, he told her once, his weathered hands adjusting her rifle sight. They're the smartest. The most patient. The ones who understand that nature doesn't care about your ego. Callahan stopped, turned. His eyes swept the landscape with the predatory focus of someone who'd hunted men in 13 countries. Jessica felt his gaze pass over her position like a searchlight. Her heart hammered once, twice, then slowed. In that moment, the desert went quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. He moved on Doc graduation day. Came with cloudless skies and a wind that smelled like creosote and possibility. The class assembled on the range for the final qualification. One shot, 900 yards, wind gusting at 12 miles per hour. Miss and you recycled through the entire program. No exceptions. Jessica watched 5 candidates go before her. 3 hit center mass, 2 missed wide. When her name was called, she heard the murmur ripple through the observation gallery. Garrett was there. She knew, though she didn't look. She'd stopped looking for his approval somewhere around week 4. When she'd realized the only person she needed to prove anything to was the woman staring back from the mirror each morning. She settled into position behind the rifle, a Remington M24 that felt like an old friend now, and found her breathing. Rhythm, slow inhale through the nose, slower exhale through barely parted lips. The wind kicked up dust devils 50 yards downrange. She watched them dance, calculated drift, made minute adjustments to the scope. The target waited, patient and still. The world narrowed. Heartbeat, breath, wind, distance, variables becoming certainty dot in her mind. She heard her father's voice. Don't fight the wind, sweetheart. Dance with it. She squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked across the desert like a whip. 900 yards away, the target's center mass bloomed red. Perfect hit. The range officer's voice came through the speaker, flat and professional. Confirmed. Qualification complete. The gallery exploded into applause, but Jessica barely heard it. She was already standing, already moving, muscle memory and training, carrying her through the weapons clearing procedure. When she finally turned toward the gallery, she saw Garrett standing near the fence, arms crossed, expression unreadable. For a moment, their eyes met across the distance. Then slowly it might have been painful, he nodded. Just once. A gesture of respect harder won than any trophy. Later that evening, as the newly graduated snipers celebrated at a local bar in Coronado, Garrett approached her table. The cocky smirk was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like humility. I owe you an apology, he said, loud enough that nearby conversations stopped. And about a month of gear carrying? Jessica looked up at him, took a slow sip of her beer. Keep the apology, she said, but I'll take you up on that gear. The bar erupted in laughter, but this time it felt different. This time she was part of the joke, not the target of it. 2 years later, Jessica would deploy to a classified location in the Middle East, where her first operational shot would save the lives of 17 hostages and end a siege that had stretched into its 3rd day. The after-action report would call it one of the most technically difficult shots in recent special operations history. News outlets would eventually break the story, and Jessica Morgan would become the first woman to graduate Scout Sniper, school and execute a successful combat rescue mission. But she'd never forget that conference room, the sound of men laughing at her ambition, the weight of doubt that felt heavier than any pack. She'd never forget choosing to carry it anyway, because the only approval that matters is the one you give yourself. And some shots are made long before you pull the trigger. The ghillie suit still hangs in her closet back in Virginia Beach, smelling faintly of desert sage and the silence of proving grounds. Sometimes, on quiet mornings, she runs her fingers through its frayed netting and remembers what it feels like to be invisible until the moment you choose to be seen. If this story moved you, drop a comment below and let me know what you think. And if you believe in people who refuse to accept the limits others set for them, hit that subscribe button, because every week I bring you stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. See you in the next one.